Hello, I'm Justin Wakefield, and Ron Silva, David Vester, and I created this presentation for Chapter 4, which talks about the third way, the principles of continual learning and experimentation. So the first step is enabling organizational learning and a safety culture. So to enable us to safely work in complex systems, which deal with technology nowadays, our organization must become better at self-diagnostics and self-improvement, and skilled at detecting problems, solving them, and making the solutions available throughout the organization. I think this way will allow us to learn from our mistakes and turn them into an understanding that prevents these mistakes from occurring in the future. Dr. Steven Spear said that for such an organization, responding to crises is not idiosyncratic work. It is something that is done all the time. It is the responsiveness that is their source of reliability. And I'll go more into an example of this on the next slide about something major that happened and how one of these companies, fought against it and still came out kicking on the other side. But I kind of wanted to talk about human error and how do we deal with those kind of employees who make errors. Sometimes, in jobs in the past, I've worked with bosses that when I've made an error, they've gotten annoyed or mad, and I've kind of got in trouble for something that would have happened to anybody, and I don't think that's how it should be dealt with. I think it's important to take that employee and make sure that they've learned from their mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes in the field, and the important thing is not that we get blamed for it or fired because of it, but it's that we actually learn from it, and that everyone can learn from that and know to not make that mistake in the future. So going on to my next slide, talks about institutionalizing the importance of daily work. So, on April 1st, 2011, the entire Amazon East Zone went down, including Reddit and Quora, but Netflix stayed up because of their architectural design decisions. I wanted to read about kind of what they did. So they ran something called Chaos Monkey, which, it helped them to become more resilient, and it constantly injected failures into their pre-production and production environments. So they were constantly trying to mess up their servers and whatnot to see if they could fix it if it went down. They ended up, when this ended up happening, they were able to stay afloat because of this that they've been doing. And I think during normal work hours, it's important to just try to test your systems and be ready for if something happens. I think too many times companies get safe where they're at, and they never think something like this can happen, but it does. And I think those who prepare for it and try to cause these to their own devices, they'll end up being okay in the long run. So a successful company always thinks about failures, accidents, and mistakes as an opportunity for learning. So I think if we have that mindset of just constantly testing our systems and just being ready for anything that may happen, we're going to be okay.
My name is Ronald, and I'm going to talk about transform the local discovery into global improvement. And if you have a good idea, pass it on. Where I work, I can see this type of method that we apply every day in production. Um, All these are good ideas that become a major changes for the benefit for the company and on the workers. Especially this method that make the work more efficient for the process. When we see that these methods are good, that they are really effective, we have to standardize. Um, and this is the sample that I have here about the SOPs. And the SOPs stand for Standard Operation Procedures. And these standards are clear explanation of the process, where the reason for this process is specified. We have the scope, we have each one of the steps to follow, and what will be the correction action in case there any deviation. This is a complete guide if somebody is a staff change, there will be a SOP for the new staff to follow the same rules, the same steps for the specific job. All those good ideas can become a rule for the entire company and for each one of the branches. This process, this model is really good. Is great. Now I'm gonna talk about the inject resilience pattern into our daily works. Of how say here resilience is the ability of the people or company to face moment of adversity and quickly adapt to the changes. Um, Many companies apply this technique to improve their ability to react to the failures. If an organization is not prepared in case something fail, the reaction will be bad. They really don't know how to react, and the capacity of recovery will be slow. This means that the organization is very fragile. If the organization is resilient, will be prepared for any type of failure that may occur because they have prepared and have spent time to test and analyze possible failures that could attack the organization. This is all these failures are done intentionally, uh, and they are introducing fails to the organization. So that way, the staff have to learn what to do in each case. They have to resolve and that will be remain for a way to learning for the whole team. There is another term that is called anti-fragility, and is culture organization that are uh, benefit by having this type of tension and failure in the system because their preparation is more efficient. Uh, we see on the text about the case of on Netflix and Chaos Monkey. Like this company have a this specific department that is dedicated to failures and and make the company prepare and resilient enough to any case. Uh, if anything happens, they're gonna be ready to act and have the correction action for for these failures.
The next section talks about how leaders can reinforce a learning culture. Traditionally, leaders were expected to be solely responsible for setting objectives and making all the right decisions to accomplish those objectives. They also had to set the emotional tone for the group they were leading. Now, there is evidence that shows greatness isn't achieved by the leaders simply making all the right choices for their teams. Instead, a leader's role is to create the conditions so that their team can discover greatness themselves in regard to their daily work. Both the leaders and the workers must work together and mutually depend on each other. Jim Womack, who authored Gemba Walks, describes the complementary relationships between leaders and frontline workers. There must be mutual respect between the two. This is important because neither can solve problems alone. Leaders aren't close enough to the work, which is required to solve any problem, and the frontline workers do not have a broader organizational context or the authority to make changes outside their area of work. Mike Rother formalized these methods into a set of rules and standards. The result is one that mirrors a scientific method. This problem-solving approach allows leaders to help workers see and solve problems in their daily work. In observing Toyota and how this process was implemented, Mike observed, Toyota is an organization that is defined primarily by the unique behavior routines it continually teaches to all its members. I took this to mean that Toyota is a problem-solving and testing company who happens to make cars rather than a car manufacturing company who tries to solve problems. In continuing with the concept of taking a scientific approach to problem solving, we can follow the steps of stating the problem so all understand the issue we are seeking to solve, establishing the hypothesis of how our proposed countermeasures will potentially solve the issue, what methods we will use for testing the hypothesis, our interpretation of the results, and applying what we have discovered to be used in the next iteration of the scientific method. In conclusion, the third way principles address the importance and need of putting value in organizational learning, enabling high trust and boundary spanning between functions, accept that failure will always occur in complex systems, and that leads to creating an environment where it is acceptable to talk about problems so we can create safe systems of work. Finally, to achieve better overall performance and resilience, along with increased job satisfaction and improved organization adaptability, we must strive to foster a culture for continual learning, experimentation, and implementation of those experiments, improve the feedback and feed-forward loops in the flow of communication within a group, follow the scientific method. We need to take an iterative approach to the solved problems, which includes discovering and defining a target condition or problem, stating the hypothesis, build and execute experiments around solving the problem, and evaluating the results to see if it successfully resolves the problem. This is our presentation. Thank you for your time, and please let us know if you have any questions or comments about the topics.